My guest today is Fritz Coleman, who was a weekday weathercaster at NBC4 Los Angeles for 39 years. He's been a working stand-up comic for even longer, having made 8 appearances on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno and Johnny Carson, and opened for many showbiz icons, including Ray Charles and Debbie Reynolds. In today's episode, Fritz talks about his podcast, Media Path Podcast, with Louise Palanker. If you've ever become obsessed with a topic and taken a deep dive into consuming all you could uncover about it, then Media Path is your new go-to podcast. Welcome to Lifeology.
I'm very happy to be with you, James. I think you provide a great service to people, especially after the pandemic when we were isolated and stuck with ourselves.
I really appreciate that. You know, it's interesting. I was asked to do a lot of different shows specifically, you know, about the pandemic and ways in which to create self-soothing behaviors, because as we're in quarantine for so long that everyone was just going out of their mind. So I'm honored to be a part of the show with you today and all the other people who've continued to inspire the people around us as well. So thanks once again for being a guest.
Thank you.
You have done so many things. So I was thinking about this prior to starting. So for being a weathercaster for 39 years, I'm sure the technology is very different than when you first started versus now. What was different when you started as a weathercaster versus now when it comes to the technology?
Wow, so many differences. You know, our presentation has gotten a lot more colorful and digital and a lot more movement. Our accuracy has stayed about the same over the years, but our presentation has gotten really interesting. Now we have AI and all these various ways to present our information, and all, you know, the accuracy almost doesn't matter as long as you can keep their attention visually for 2.5 minutes.
That's fair.
That's pretty much what it is. But it's changed in other ways too. You know, when I started out in the business in 1983. There were only 3 television stations broadcasting in Los Angeles. Oh, now there are like 9, and 5 of those do news all day long. So the competition has increased exponentially, and it's just a different business. I probably retired precisely the right moment.
Sure you did. I know when they used to do sweeps weeks before, you know, there was so much pressure there, and I know things are different now as far as how they're able to capture those metrics. But yeah, there is a lot of saturation in the market for news cycles.
And there's cable and satellite, and you know, real news junkies don't even watch local television anymore. They watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox or whatever their selection is. So it's just a different time. But there are a lot more venues now. We have podcasts where people can really be themselves and provide these very focused services like you do to so many people, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, when I was an undergraduate professor years ago, and that would have been like 2004 maybe, and I had to do a podcast then. I was like, what is a podcast? And so I'd have to record, you know, obviously the typical podcast now, but that was when it first started. And I struggled with it. So the irony is years later, here I am having my own show. So it's kind of funny. I had to learn.
No, it's fantastic. Well, you have a certain expertise. There are a lot of people with podcasts that have no particular focus in their lives. They're just doing it to hear themselves talk. But you have something to offer to people. But I was brand new to the podcasting world until about 2.5 years ago. My co-host, Louise Palanker, whose background was in radio. She started her own radio company, Premier Radio Networks, which is now a part of iHeartRadio. She's done 5 podcasts since you could be a podcaster. And
goodness.
So when I retired from NBC, my contract lapsed and I was no longer tethered to NBC. We've been friends for 30 years. She produced a couple of my one-person shows, and we just used to have interesting conversations between ourselves. And we were of like minds. We loved the same books and the movies and politics and other sorts of media. And she said, why don't you just come on and we'll continue what we always do every day and have great conversations about stuff. Smart. And really, that's how our podcast was born. I'm new to it. She's not. So I understand how hard it is, but when you were in the pioneer days of podcasting like you were.
Wow. But yeah, that is a lot of, that's really neat. I always think it's cool to hear how shows start because, you know, like you said, you guys just talk about those things all the time. Why not have everybody else here, have great, interesting guests come on and talk about those things. I wanted to, because I want to talk more about that in a second, but this is the other question I wanted to ask you as well. So first off, you've done 4 one-man shows. What does that mean?
Well, I came up with a new title for what I do on stage. I'm a comic. I mean, I got my job doing the weather at Los Angeles from being a comic. I was working at the Comedy Store, and the news director at NBC was in the audience one night and saw me perform. And while I was on stage, I told an anecdote about having done the weather in the Navy. I worked for Armed Forces Radio and Television in the Navy. Oh, wow. And I was forced to do the weather, but I didn't know anything about it. And so I made this anecdote about that. And he just thought that was fantastic. And he asked me if I would like to come and do some vacation relief weather forecasting at Channel 4. And I was making $45 a night at the Comedy Store. I said, oh, my God, when do you want me to start? And so that's how my career started. And the only reason it started that way is there's no weather in California. It's the same forecast from April to October. And so I seized this opportunity, and it turned into a wonderful career. But anyway, that's what happened in the beginning.
So when a person is at what with a one-man show, do they play? Is it just you talking, or do you have different characters you play?
Yes,
How does that work?
Yes. No, I'm sorry.
No, it's totally fine.
I did typical monologues as a comedian, but then I developed this thing called a single topic monologue. So the first one of my one-man shows, it was 90 minutes long. It was about being a parent, and it was growing up in an alcoholic family and just revealing myself to my children. This is odd. I'd love to get your opinion about this, being a psychologist, but when I went to my father's funeral, I was mixed emotions about it, because what was astounding to me was how little I actually knew about my father. Everybody was going up on the dais and telling these stories about my dad that I'd never heard before, and it made me sort of melancholy. I thought, I never want my children to be astounded by stuff they didn't know about me. I'm going to reveal my whole life to them. So I sat and started making notes about my life, and I thought I would record it on a home video camera in my den, put it in a safe deposit box, and then when they were old enough, like 18, they could watch this thing and learn all the bare truth about my life.
Wow, that's powerful.
And I started telling my friends about it, and they said, that would make a fantastic monologue. Why don't you write it and make it a performance piece? So I made it a performance piece. It was I had 2 sons at the time. Now I have 3 kids. But it was called It's Me, Dad. And public television in Los Angeles bought it and aired it 7 years in a row on Father's Day. It's an homage to being a parent and just being honest about my relationship with my father.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. So I did a series of single topic monologues. The first one was about being a father. The second one was about divorce. The third one was about being in the news business. And the fourth one, my most recent one that finished about 1.5 years ago, was called Tonight at 11. It was about being in the news business. So I just love it. It's funny, but when you do a one-person show, it doesn't have to be funny every second. You can have serious moments and thoughtful moments, and that makes the jokes even funnier. So that's what that was. That's
so fascinating. Congratulations on all of your success with that.
Thank you.
As a comic, how do you... So let me back up. So on this side, every time I watch a comic, if it's someone that I know about, I'm like, okay, I'm fine. But if it's a new comic I don't know about, and I don't know that many, unfortunately, but if I'm watching them, I get this cringe, like, because I have my empathy level so high that I'm like, if they bomb, and it's so hard for me to watch it.
You get flop sweat for them. I know. I get that. I'm an observational comedian. I don't do any current events material. I don't do politics. Sure. And for a bunch of reasons. First of all, the shelf life of political jokes is very short. You got to keep writing. That's true. Second of all, we're in a very sort of divided world right now, and you can do a political joke and alienate 50% of your audience immediately. So I stay away from that. So I just do observational things. My most recent show that I just taped at the El Portal Theater in North Hollywood, and we're going to try to sell it to a streaming service, was a show called Unassisted Living, which is about being old. And I just love it. I love picking a topic and then fleshing it out to its ultimate degree and having fun with it.
Wow, that is so neat. How is it for you to be that vulnerable and transparent about your life in front of all these strangers?
That's such a great question. I can tell you're a psychologist. I think it's really, I was an only child, which is a whole other can of worms. Yeah. But I think I experience an intimacy on stage with an audience much easier than I do in a one-on-one relationship, which is sad and it's dysfunctional, but it's true. I mean, as an only child, I was able to exist and sort of compartmentalize my life. But when I'm on stage, I have this, although it's a false intimacy and it's only temporary, I have this intimacy with the people in the audience. And when you connect with them, you're giving voice to something they may think about, but they didn't have the right words to put it into words or to make it funny. That's a real connection. And you loosen them up. And just for an hour, especially now, just for an hour, you're taking them out of their heads. You're making them forget the cares of the world. And really, I think, especially now in the world we're living in, it's a great service.
Yeah, it really is. Hey, as you were saying that, I was thinking about the biomechanics of that. So when we make someone laugh, we immediately join with them. So we're actually releasing oxytocin. So if you and I are talking, laughing, we're releasing oxytocin back and forth, which is a trust hormone, which is when you start to feel comfortable with the other person. So I'm thinking about that, but then I'm also thinking laughing and crying, your body does the same has the pretty much identical physiological response. The only difference is the thoughts that you have about it. So when we're experiencing a lot of different things in life, that creates energy. So thoughts create emotions. Emotions create how our body responds. And as we know, the emotions can have a sense of tension. So, people can keep it in their shoulders. But so when you make people laugh, you're actually taking that energy of whatever the topic may be, and you're helping them express it through laughter. And so you're making it in a more normalizing it. So allow them to talk about topics that are very difficult, but to allow that expression to come out through laughter as you join with them with the oxytocin. So it's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that until just now.
That is extremely interesting. It's the first biological explanation of what I do that was given to me. And but it was fascinating. When I listen to this, I'm going to write some of that stuff down. It's really quite fascinating. But so I'm not fantasizing when I say that we have this just momentary intimacy generated with the audience because of this exchange of this oxytocin energy. That's really fascinating.
Yes. Yeah. So that would be something to think more about as well, because with the oxytocin components, and as we know, the more people laugh, laughter actually strengthens the heart. And actually laughter, what it does is it creates natural killer cells in the blood. So natural killer cells are those kind of like the warriors of the bloodstream that kill any tumorous type of free radicals or any type of unhealthy particles in the blood. So when you laugh, you actually create those natural killer cells, which helps people become healthier. So that's why they say laughter is the best medicine. Well, it's actually true because it does create those natural killer cells in the blood. So look at you, sir, helping all these people through all these struggles that they have.
Well, I'll tell you, it explains so much, and it explains why all of our famous comedians like George Burns and Bob Hope live to be 100 years old.
Makes sense.
Because they're making the audience feel better, and the feedback loop is they're feeling better themselves. Yes. Plus, I guess all those guys took masseuses on the road with them, and every day they get a massage.
That's true. So, but George Burns, I don't know. I mean, he's smoking so much. I don't even know how he lived that long, but I mean, fantastic.
Like 20 cigars a day. I don't believe.
I know. That is funny.
That's so interesting.
Now, with your career as well, you've done so many things. And so when we jump into this your Media Path podcast in just a second, what are some of the biggest life lessons you've learned?
Well, that's a question.
It's a big question.
No, but it's a great question that I've had to answer before. Before the pandemic, I would get invited once a semester to go speak. My friend is a professor at California State University at Northridge, and he would ask me to just come and talk to my class about the experience. Mm-hmm. And he would always set me up by saying, "What's the one lesson you could impart to these kids?" And I say, "The only thing I bring to the table is don't be afraid to try something you hadn't planned on before." For instance, I came out here in 1980 to pursue a career in stand-up comedy. And I told you before, the NBC representative was in the audience. And just a momentary twist of fate, he offered me this job. And the only thing that I brought to the table was I wasn't afraid to say, you know what? That might be a great career advancement. Why don't I try? I didn't set out to be a weatherman. It wasn't part of my linear journey to succeed. But when he said that, I said, being on TV in LA is a wonderful thing. And it turned out to be a 39-year career. It allowed me to give my children a stable life and a stable upbringing. So all I say to people is, and all I sort of attribute my success to is not being afraid to try something I hadn't planned on doing at first.
Yeah, and I think that is one thing that many people do struggle with, either the feel of failure or just an insecurity, et cetera. So, I mean, I think that's a powerful lesson. I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, do something every day that scares you. I'm paraphrasing it, but that's brilliant. It's brilliant because that's what helps us grow and develop in so many ways. That's just pretty cool.
I agree.
So I wanted to transition into Media Path Podcast. So that's with Louise Palanker. And for those of you listening right now, you can go to mediapathpodcast.com to learn more about it. So what are the different type of topics you all talk about?
Well, we try to come up with a way to describe our show. It's kind of woke boomers. People, people born in the post World War II era, and we're sort of free thinking. And although we don't talk about politics, we're more on the liberal and sort of progressive side of our discussions about everything. And so we've been friends for 35 years, and we just sort of are of a like mind when it comes to movies. She's a documentary filmmaker and just completed a documentary about the Cowsills, the great band called A Family Band, which is now streaming on Amazon Prime. So she's very aware of new media. And so we go on, we start our show. We call it Media Path. We start our show with about 10 minutes of discussing new things that people can watch and might enjoy. We don't review them. Okay. We just suggest them. For instance, this last Tuesday, we tape every Tuesday. I talked about the new season of The Crown, which for my money is maybe one of the best shows in the history of television. And she talked about two other British productions. And it takes about 10 minutes, and we just offer suggestions. And then we have on a guest. This week we had a guy that has a podcast, and we had a guy who is a host of a radio show on public radio in Los Angeles, KCRW, and he's very knowledgeable about politics. Then we had the Cowsills on, coming from their dressing room in Branson, Missouri, just before they went on stage for the Christmas show. And so we mix it up. And honestly, the guests we have the most fun with, because we're in LA, we have access to stars and stuff. There's a star in every corner. We are able to get people who were stars in sitcoms in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, people who were heroes to other people and heroes to us. And so we have a great time, just interviewing people. And we can go deep. We had Adam Schiff, the congressman, on talking about his book. We had Ira Shapiro on talking about his book about Mitch McConnell. Interesting. So we pride ourselves in doing our homework. So immediately the guests find out that we're sincere about having them on because we've done our homework. That makes them relax. And as you know, it makes them a little more forthcoming in their answers and stuff. So it's fun.
Wow. I definitely recommend this. I was listening to one of them just before we started here. It was nice to hear the banter between the two. You can tell that you have been friends for quite a while.
Thank you.
What's next for you all?
We're trying to build, better than I, because you've been doing this a lot longer than I have. We're just trying to grow our audience. Podcasting isn't like radio and TV where, you can buy advertising and call people's attention to it with newspaper ads and stuff. There are 150,000 podcasts in America. Yeah. And so you have to slowly grow your audience and not be obsessed with how long it's taking. And that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to become known to more people. And truthfully, when you free yourself from, like you do in radio, when you're worried about the overnight ratings and the sweeps ratings and all that stuff, and when you free yourself up to just don't worry about how many people are listening, have a good time. It's such a great feeling to just do it for the love of it. I love to have conversations with people about topics I don't know anything about. I feel like it's a learning experience. And so I'm just enjoying it so much. So we just like to grow it slowly and introduce it to more people.
So I was looking at your Instagram and it looked like you had Henry Winkler that was on there.
Henry Winkler is our only repeating guest, although the Cowsills have been on twice. He's our only single repeating guest. Henry's been a friend of Wheezy's, my co-host, for many years. Probably the single loveliest man in show business. I love stars who are extremely talented, but who are comfortable in their own skin. Yes. He loves his fans. Nobody treats his fans better than Henry. We produced a television show with him that didn't get picked up, but we had the experience of just walking around town with Henry Winkler and watching the world react to the Fonz. It's an amazing experience.
That's funny.
He treats everybody with such respect, and he's a great guy.
Yeah, I saw his on the HBO show. I think it's Ed, where
Barry.
Very, yeah.
And it's way dark. It's
very dark.
Side of Henry Winkler, yeah.
Yes, and when I saw him, I was like, oh, he does so well at it. I mean, he's narcissistic. Yeah, he's fantastic. I've seen him in many different things, but I really enjoyed watching him. And Barry, it's like you said, very dark, but it was very talented. All of them.
I agree.
That is really cool. That is awesome. Well, we only have a couple more seconds here. Is there anything else you want to tell us about your show or anything?
As I said before, I appreciate what you do for the public, James, with your little tidbits. People get to take away a little life lesson, there's no greater service. And you give us a chance to talk about our podcast, and we appreciate it very much.
Oh, my pleasure. I highly enjoy Media Path Podcast. So if your listeners want to find out more information about you, to listen to the show, to learn more about you personally and about Louise Palanker, where do they find all this information online?
Go to mediapathpodcast.com. Our bio information, our back catalog of episodes is on there, other peripheral stuff. And I hope you enjoy it.
Wonderful. My viewers and listeners also know that if I can't find this information any other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmillerlifeology.com and I'll link you with Fritz Coleman. Thank you so much for being a fantastic guest on my show today.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, James.